The private jet shimmered under the golden hue of the afternoon sun, sitting regally on the tarmac like a symbol of untouchable luxury. Inside, its cabin breathed elegance, plush leather seats, polished wood finishes, champagne chilled to perfection. Passengers, adorned in designer wear and quiet self-importance, moved with the assurance of wealth and status. It was the kind of flight where everyone assumed they already knew who mattered. Among these elite travelers was Naomi Williams, a striking black woman in her late 30s. She walked with quiet grace, dressed not flamboyantly but with unmistakable class. An elegant navy blazer, diamond stud earrings, and her natural hair neatly pulled back. There was something powerful about her presence, not loud or boastful, but undeniable. She took her seat in the front row of the cabin without hesitation, her movements fluid and practiced, like someone who had done this many times before. But it wasn't long before Lauren noticed her. Lauren, the lead flight attendant, had worked in luxury aviation for over a decade. She was sharp, always composed, and carried herself with an air of quiet authority. But over the years, her professionalism had been tainted by something darker. She had learned to read people, or so she believed. In her eyes, class had a look, a tone, a skin color, and Naomi didn't fit it. She paused in the aisle, her eyes narrowing, lips pressed in a firm line. There was no checking of the passenger manifest, no verification, just a presumption dressed in civility. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lauren said, stepping toward Naomi with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This section is reserved for elite passengers. You'll need to move to the back." Naomi looked up, her expression unreadable, her voice calm. "I'm in the correct seat. You might want to double-check your list." Lauren's face twitched slightly. She wasn't used to being questioned, especially not like this. She leaned in, her voice lowering but losing none of its edge. "I don't need to check. I know who belongs here." The statement hung heavy in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, some intrigued, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Naomi didn't move. She didn't raise her voice or stand up. She simply met Lauren's stare with one of her own, firm, composed, refusing to give in. Lauren's professional facade began to crack. The embarrassment of being challenged in front of the elite passengers, some of whom she hoped to impress, made her act without thought. Her voice rose sharply, "Move now, or I'll call security." But Naomi remained still, her hands resting gently on her lap. "I'm not moving," she said, her voice like still water, quiet but with depths that could drown. Lauren's face flushed red. Her pride was bruised, and in that split second of rage, she did something unthinkable. Her hand came down and slapped Naomi hard across the face. The sound of it cracked through the cabin like a whip. Gasps erupted. Champagne glasses trembled. A businessman across the aisle dropped his tablet. A woman clutched her pearls, whispering, "Did she just—" Naomi didn't flinch. Her face remained turned, cheek glowing red. But slowly, she turned back toward Lauren and reached for her phone, her fingers moving with steady precision. She typed something without panic. Then she looked up, her eyes cool and steady. "You'll regret that," she said quietly. For the first time, Lauren felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Naomi's eyes that made her breath catch. Not fear, not anger, power. But before Lauren could say anything more, a voice crackled through her earpiece. It was the co-pilot. Lauren, you're needed at the cockpit, now." Lauren blinked. "I'm with a passenger," she whispered into the mic. The voice came back, more urgent this time. "Captain says immediately." Confused and frustrated, Lauren turned sharply and walked to the cockpit. When she entered, the captain didn't even look up. "Close the door," she obeyed, confused. The captain handed her a tablet. "Check the flight manifest, passenger 1A. She glanced at it, scoffing. "It's that woman. She's not on any of our elite programs. She must have—" "Keep reading," the captain interrupted. Lauren frowned and scrolled down. Her mouth opened slightly, then widened. It read, "Passenger, Naomi Williams. Seat, 1A. Owner, Naomi Williams. Title, Chairwoman and CEO, Williams Aerospace Group. Private aircraft, owned and registered under Williams International Holdings. Lauren's face turned pale. She read it again, then looked at the captain, who stared back with thinly veiled disappointment. "She owns this plane," he said flatly. "She owns the company that leases our jets, and now, because of you, we might not have a job tomorrow." Lauren's knees nearly gave out. She stammered, "I didn't know. I thought—" "You didn't think, you assumed?" Back in the cabin, Naomi sat quietly. Her phone buzzed once. She read the message and gave a small nod. The door to the cockpit opened again and Lauren stepped out like a ghost. Her polished smile was gone, her posture stiff. She walked slowly to Naomi's seat, all eyes on her. "Ms. Williams," she began, but Naomi raised a hand. "I've already filed the report," Naomi said softly. "I suggest you return to the jump seat and remain there until we land." Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it again. She nodded silently and walked away. A few rows back, a young man whispered, "She owns the plane?" His companion nodded, stunned. "And probably the airline too." The rest of the flight was silent, thick with tension. Passengers looked at Naomi differently now, not as someone out of place, but someone powerful, someone they should have known. But Naomi didn't seek their recognition. She reclined her seat slightly and closed her eyes, her face serene despite the sting on her cheek. When the jet landed, 2 black SUVs were already waiting at the runway. Men in black suits stepped forward as the passengers disembarked. They bypassed everyone and walked directly to Naomi. "Ma'am, we've prepared the press response. Your legal team is on standby. Do you want to make a statement?" Naomi shook her head. "Not yet." Lauren stood by the plane's stairwell, watching, unable to leave, knowing her career was unraveling. One of the executives turned and looked at her. "You'll be hearing from legal," he said bluntly before walking away. The world soon learned what had happened. The media exploded with the story. Headlines flashed across networks. Flight attendant slaps jet owner mid-flight. CEO assaulted on her own plane. Racism at 30,000 feet. Naomi didn't give interviews. She didn't need to. The story told itself. Lauren was fired within 24 hours. An internal investigation uncovered not just this incident, but a troubling pattern of behavior. Her silence couldn't protect her anymore. Meanwhile, Naomi's company stock rose. Investors admired her poise, her calm under pressure, her refusal to lash out or escalate. And in quiet circles, people talked about how she didn't slap back, didn't shout, didn't break composure. She didn't need to, because some people fight with power, and some people are power. Naomi Williams was both. And in a world where assumptions still dictated access, still defined worth, still tried to gatekeep success, she had just dismantled a wall, one flight at a time. Not with vengeance, but with quiet dignity. And a seat she never had to justify. The air in the cabin remained heavy after what had just unfolded. Eyes darted between Naomi and Lauren, whispers tangled with stunned silence. Everyone on board had just witnessed something unforgettable, but what came next would etch this day into the core memories of every soul aboard that flight. Minutes later, the door to the cockpit opened slowly. The pilot stepped out. Tall, authoritative, but clearly shaken. His normally composed face was pale, his jaw tight with disbelief. He walked past the passengers, barely acknowledging them. Every step was purposeful, and his destination was clear. He stopped in front of Lauren, who had returned to the galley in a daze, her hands still trembling from the confrontation, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. Her eyes lifted as she noticed the captain approaching, a mixture of confusion and relief on her face. Perhaps she thought he had come to support her. He did not. "Step aside," he said, his voice cold and clipped, with no room for interpretation. Lauren blinked. "Captain, He raised a hand, silencing her. "I just received a call from executive management. The owner of this airline is on board." A low gasp rolled through the cabin. Murmurs turned into audible shock. The hum of the engines now felt like background music to a moment of reckoning. The captain turned slightly and looked straight at Naomi, who was still seated with the same calm poise she had maintained from the beginning. "It's Miss Williams," he said. Every pair of eyes snapped toward her. Lauren's hand flew to her mouth, her lips trembled, her skin, once flush with arrogant confidence, now drained to a ghostly white. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "No, that can't be." But it was. Naomi stood slowly, her movements graceful, deliberate. She didn't need to raise her voice. The very way she carried herself spoke volumes. She stood tall, eyes unwavering, posture royal. There was nothing to prove anymore. Her truth was standing right in front of them. "I'm Naomi Williams," she said. Her voice was firm, steady, a melodic current beneath a mountain of strength. "And I own this airline." Shock rippled across the faces of the passengers. Some turned red with embarrassment, others bowed their heads in shame. The same woman they had seen as an outsider minutes ago now stood revealed as the very foundation upon which their luxury experience existed. Lauren's knees buckled slightly, her throat constricted, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own thoughts. I didn't know," she stammered, a desperate plea leaking through her panic. Naomi didn't flinch. She stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "No," Naomi said slowly. "You didn't bother to check. You judged me based on appearances." Her words were not screamed, but they pierced deeper than any shout ever could. They reached past Lauren's ears and drove straight into her conscience, if any of it remained. Around them, the rest of the cabin remained frozen, no one daring to move. Even those who had quietly approved of Lauren's confrontation now shrank into their seats, exposed by association. The captain, still by Naomi's side, spoke again. "We're making an unscheduled landing, company orders." No one questioned it. No one dared. The plane began its descent. Outside the windows, the vast blue sky gave way to land as the jet prepared to touch down. The moment the wheels hit the runway, everything shifted. A sleek black car and two luxury SUVs rolled up alongside the plane. The aircraft door opened, and from the stairway emerged two individuals in black tailored suits, moving with quiet urgency. They boarded with respectful nods to the crew and stopped in front of Naomi. "Miss Williams," one of them said, voice courteous, tone polished. "Everything is prepared for your review. A press briefing is pending your direction." Naomi nodded. She then turned her gaze to Lauren, who was now visibly trembling, her legs locked in place, her hands clutched in front of her as if they alone could shield her from the consequences. "Your behavior today was disgraceful," Naomi said. "It was a reflection of deep prejudice and poor judgment. You embarrassed this company, you put it at legal risk, and most of all, you assaulted me, on my own aircraft." Lauren tried to speak. No words came out. "Effective immediately," Naomi said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're fired." For a moment, Lauren just stood there, shocked, frozen. Her lips parted, her eyes flooded with tears. She looked around, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. But there was no one. No colleague, no passenger, no superior willing to speak. She was alone in her shame. Before she could say another word, another figure stepped aboard, a uniformed officer followed by another. "Lauren Price?" the officer asked, holding up a tablet. She turned slowly. "You're under arrest for assault," the officer stated firmly. Handcuffs glinted in the artificial light of the cabin. Lauren burst into sobs. "Please, no, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean..." But intent didn't matter anymore, only the impact. The officers read her rights as they handcuffed her, gently but without hesitation. Her makeup streaked down her cheeks. The powerful flight attendant who minutes ago barked orders now looked like a shell of herself. Her cries echoed across the cabin, but they were met with silence. As she was escorted off the plane, passengers moved aside wordlessly. Some refused to look at her. Others couldn't stop watching, as if the reality of the moment kept unfolding like a slow, inevitable wave of justice. Naomi remained standing, her eyes following Lauren's exit, but her face betraying no satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about accountability. Outside, the media had already arrived. Cameras were pointed at the jet. Reporters waited for a statement, their microphones stretching forward like hungry mouths. But Naomi didn't face them. She didn't need the spotlight. The truth had already been seen. Instead, she turned to the assistant who stood patiently beside her. "I want her file handed over to HR," she said. "No severance, no recommendation, and let legal follow up with civil charges." "Yes, ma'am," the assistant said. "And the crew?" Naomi asked. The assistant glanced at the others. "We'll be reviewing the flight recordings. Any witnesses who fail to intervene will be dealt with according to company policy." Naomi nodded. Her tone didn't carry anger, just resolution. When she finally stepped off the plane, cameras clicked rapidly, but she kept her gaze forward. A black umbrella opened above her head as she entered the waiting vehicle. The door closed softly behind her. Within seconds, the convoy drove off. Back on the plane, the mood had shifted permanently. Passengers were stunned into reflection. Some now questioned their own assumptions. Others wondered how close they had come to being part of something ugly. But one thing was clear. No one would forget Naomi Williams. She wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a force. In boardrooms, they'd soon whisper about the incident as a case study in composure and command. In HR circles, it would become required training material. In diversity workshops, it would spark needed conversations. But in Naomi's mind, the event was simply another moment in a long history of being underestimated, misread, and dismissed. This wasn't the first time she'd been mistaken for someone less. It wouldn't be the last. But this time, the world had seen the mistake in real time and watched as justice arrived without shouting, without chaos. It arrived with clarity, with consequences, with grace wrapped in power. In a world that too often rewarded appearances and punished truth, Naomi had quietly turned the rules upside down. She didn't seek validation. She embodied it. And while Lauren's cries faded into the background, while apologies were whispered too late, Naomi moved forward, untouched by the ignorance she'd risen above. Because sometimes it's not about proving who you are, it's about reminding the world that they should have known all along. The world moved quickly, but some stories refused to fade. Naomi Williams' experience on that jet, her calm refusal to bend under the weight of assumption, and her graceful command of justice echoed far beyond the luxury cabin where it began. Within days, the incident spread like wildfire across social media, across newsrooms, and across boardrooms that often spoke of diversity but rarely faced it so directly. Clips from bystander footage surfaced. Naomi's name trended globally. She hadn't asked for attention, hadn't sought a moment in the spotlight, but sometimes the truth finds its way to light whether you want it to or not. And when the cameras finally turned to her, Naomi didn't flinch. She spoke clearly, thoughtfully, and without anger. Her interviews weren't performances, they were lessons, not in revenge, not in ego, but in dignity. "Respect isn't a privilege," she told one interviewer, her voice calm but unshakable. "It's a right, and true luxury. It's not about how much money you spend, it's about how you treat people." Her words struck a chord. Across the world, people nodded, not because they hadn't heard it before, but because they had rarely seen it lived so visibly. A woman who had every reason to explode had instead chosen to elevate. And in doing so, she opened a conversation that had long needed light. Airlines began reviewing their internal policies. Naomi's own airline, under her direction, implemented a sweeping overhaul of how passengers and crew were trained. Bias awareness became mandatory. Staff evaluations began, including empathy scores. Every crew member, from flight attendants to pilots to corporate executives, now attended sessions that emphasized the human behind the ticket. Naomi didn't stop at policy. She built a new standard. No one would be judged by skin tone, attire, accent, or assumptions, not under her watch. And while she worked behind the scenes, the world watched. Media outlets praised her poise. Civil rights groups applauded her leadership. Even major CEOs took private notes on how she had handled the incident, because it was more than a PR win. It was a masterclass in how to turn pain into policy. But for Naomi, the work wasn't about applause. It wasn't about punishing those who had wronged her. It was about ensuring that the next person who looked like her didn't have to fight the same battle. That a young black woman boarding a plane didn't feel eyes questioning her right to exist in a space of comfort. That respect came standard, not as a reward, but as a basic expectation. Weeks passed. The noise began to settle, but the impact remained. Then came another flight, a different city, a different crew. But Naomi, dressed once again in quiet elegance, stepped onto the jet with the same calm strength. She wasn't testing anyone. She wasn't anticipating trouble. But the memory lingered, not just in her, but in everyone who had heard the story. As she entered the cabin, a new lead flight attendant stepped forward. She was young, nervous, but determined. Her name tag read Eleanor. Her smile was warm, her posture respectful. "Welcome aboard, Miss Williams," she said gently. "It's an honor to have you with us today." No hesitation, no doubt, just grace. Naomi returned the smile, sensing the sincerity in her voice. She took her seat in the front row again, not because of ego, but because it was hers, rightfully, undeniably. Passengers murmured softly, some recognizing her immediately, but unlike before, there was no judgment, only curiosity, admiration even. The jet engines hummed to life. As the aircraft ascended, Naomi looked out the window. The clouds opened like doors, and the sky stretched wide and infinite before her. There was something different in the air this time, not just altitude, not just the silence of the cabin, but a feeling, a shift. She leaned back into her seat, eyes still watching the horizon. And for the first time in a long time, she felt peace, not because the world had changed completely, but because she had helped tilt it even slightly towards something better. Justice had been served, but more importantly, change had begun. In the days that followed, Naomi continued her work quietly. She never once sought to profit from the story. There were offers, book deals, documentary pitches, even film rights, but she declined most. She didn't need her name in lights. What mattered was what happened next. She used the attention to fund scholarships for young women of color in aviation. She expanded her company's internship program. She sponsored community dialogues in places where voices like hers were often silenced, and she continued flying, not because she had to, but because she refused to be chased out of spaces she belonged in. She walked through every terminal like it was her boardroom, and in many ways, it was. Every gate, every seat, every boarding pass became a reminder, not of what had been done to her, but of what she had overcome. She became more than a CEO, more than a name in a headline. She became a symbol of unshaken identity. In time, people stopped asking what had happened on that flight. Instead, they asked how they could follow her lead, how they could build organizations rooted in equity, how they could recognize bias before it spilled into harm. And in classrooms, young girls studied her story, not as one of victimhood, but as one of vision. A case study in how to remain grounded, even while soaring thousands of feet above the earth. Naomi never forgot Lauren Price. The memory of that slap, the violation of dignity, the sting of injustice, never completely left her. But she didn't carry it like a wound. She carried it like a stone, a reminder of how heavy the cost of prejudice can be. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate Lauren's downfall. That part of the story to her was over. What mattered was what rose in its place. Respect, policy, legacy. And so, as the clouds parted and sunlight poured into the cabin, Naomi allowed herself a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the kind of smile that comes when you know you've done what was right, even when the world gave you every reason not to. She glanced down at the tablet in her lap, her calendar filled with meetings, interviews, projects to lead. But for this moment, she silenced the screen and returned her gaze to the open sky. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is sit quietly in the seat they've earned and let the world adjust to their presence. She had nothing to prove. She never did. And as the jet soared higher, carried by winds she now commanded, Naomi Williams leaned into the journey, not as a survivor of injustice, but as the architect of a new standard. She didn't just change the flight, she changed the altitude of what people thought was possible. And that, more than headlines, more than applause, was the legacy she intended to leave behind. Because in the end, it wasn't just about that one moment, it was about every moment after. The ones where dignity met power, where justice met grace, and where a woman, once mistaken, became unforgettable forever. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.